I'm Nintendo, some random guy on YouTube. A few videos ago, me and the Nuclear Reviewer took a look at the first season of a pretty mediocre anime called Sonic X. I watched the Japanese version while he watched the infamous English dub by 4Kids. It was pretty boring all throughout, and was filled with unfaithful versions of game characters, useless new characters, poor animation, and each episode featured the same formulaic plot where Sonic always saves the day and stops Dr. Eggman at the last moment. But since its story wasn't finished, the series continued on for another season. Today, we'll be discussing the second season of Sonic X and see if things can improve. I'm sure that it will be incredibly exciting and original. So when we last left Sonic and the gang, Angel Island appeared on Earth after Sonic used the power of the Chaos Emeralds to stop Eggman. But now the Master Emerald has been shattered, and Eggman now has unleashed Chaos, the god of destruction, onto Station Square. With every Chaos Emerald he devours, Chaos becomes stronger. So now it's up to Sonic and his pals to get the emeralds before the big drip does. If you played the games, then you know that this sounds similar to the setup for Sonic Adventure. And you'd be correct. The first 6 episodes of the season adapt the classic Dreamcast game pretty faithfully. The ideas behind this arc sound good on paper, as Sonic Adventure was a very popular game with a memorable plotline. But the concept for this arc itself already causes a lot of problems.
In the Season 1 review, I said that since the basic plot was similar to Sonic Adventure, there's no point in watching the show when you can get a better experience out of playing the game. This problem gets bigger with these arcs based off the adventure games. While the Sonic Adventure adaptation fixes a few plot holes, looks better than the cutscenes, and you don't have to play as Big the Cat, it doesn't surpass the game for the simple fact that Sonic Adventure actually has a game inside of it. Sonic Adventure isn't the best game ever, but playing it is more interesting than watching a dull version of its plot. By being so loyal to the game's story, these episodes feel very boring and pointless. Unless you're a huge fan of the games, there's no reason to watch these episodes when you can probably have a better time playing the game itself.
Taken on its own, this arc is probably the best Sonic X has done so far. There's actually some tension built throughout these episodes, as Chaos gains more emeralds and becomes more of an unstoppable threat. Tails gets a character arc as it becomes more independent from Sonic, which is the first time any character on this show gets any sticking development. But not everything about this arc works. A lot of problems arise in the transition from game to anime. These episodes feel overstuffed. There's too many plots going on at once, and they don't all get the time they need. Knuckles' adventure wraps up too quickly, Tails' plot goes on for a little longer than it needs to, and Amy and Gamma's stories didn't even need to be there. I know that they were part of the game, but it's not really relevant to the rest of the plot and could have been moved and expanded upon in a later episode.
While I thought these episodes were the best I've seen so far, knowing the plot made watching them feel like I was crossing off a checklist. Chaos shows up, check. Tails loses the Chaos Emeralds in a feat of complete stupidity, check. Knuckles hallucinates, check. This is still the best written part of the show objectively, but I personally found it as boring as the rest of the show, since there was hardly anything that was changed from the original game, except for the fight between Sonic and the Egg Viper. That isn't faithful to the games at all. If it was, it would be more like this.
Get a load of this! Get a load of this! Get a load of this! Get a load. No way! I can't believe this!
There really isn't much point in seeing it, at least in our opinions, although it does contain what I consider to be the best moment of the series so far.
Come on, step it up!
Anyway, right after this arc, we got an adaptation of everybody's favorite game, Sonic Adventure 2. A lot of our complaints with the Sonic Adventure arc also apply to this, but taken on its own, I think this arc is the better of the two. Again, these episodes are pretty loyal to the game's story, But since Sonic Adventure 2's plot is much more streamlined than Sonic Adventure's story, the writers have time to expand upon the game's foundation. Although they don't fix any of the plot holes, like how no one can tell the obvious differences between Sonic and Shadow, but they do add some extra depth to the story, like with a subplot involving the news reporter and the school teacher interviewing the man who shot Maria on the Ark. And while it is kind of censored in the English version, it's still a nice addition. Not all the new stuff works here, like a small subplot involving Chris moving out of their mansion and into the city. I know that its purpose is to help Chris accept change in his life, just like Sonic and his friends, but it's only mentioned a few times, and why would Chris be moving into the city when it was just destroyed a few episodes ago? Speaking of Chris, his only purpose here is to convince Shadow to help save the world, a role that was originally Amy's in the game. Other than that, the only purpose Chris serves is to get beat up by Shadow quite a bit, which was another series highlight.
Personally, I think that the Sonic Adventure 2 adaptation is the best series of episodes in the show so far. Despite the problems Nintendo mentioned, there's plenty to like about this version. For one thing, the show was smart enough to not bring Shadow back from the grave, completing his arc and making him one of the show's best characters. I also appreciate how Rouge's perspective is more interesting, as she's an already established character and you know she's a secret agent, making the plot much more interesting. The show has also introduced ideas like chaos control before this episode, so they feel more natural when they're introduced for this arc. I also like how they actually included Live and Learn. It's only in the Japanese version, but it makes things better nevertheless.
So, the Sonic Adventure 2 episodes adapted the game pretty well, even though the game is worth more of your time and it got as good as Sonic X could possibly get. However, I think the best thing that came out of this story arc was what came after it. Remember how in Sonic Adventure 2, Dr. Eggman blows up half of the moon? In the games, Eggman is all like,
"Let's just retcon the whole moon thing. I mean, it's not like anyone's going to notice that it's missing."
The anime actually addresses this problem by having Eggman build an artificial moon half. Nobody really cares until the Egg Moon pulls a Mr. Burns and blocks out the sun. The Doctor earns the trust of the President by selling sunlight, and no one thinks that his scheme might be for evil or profit. Sonic then starts destroying Eggman's light-generating mirror towers, and everyone thinks he's a villain now. Even Knuckles tries to beat up the one who chuckles, only because people told him to do so.
Ha! That's our Knuckles!
Using some basic science knowledge, Sonic discovers that Eggman's Sunlight Company was all just a scam. It isn't the scientist or the boy genius that figures everything out, it's the blue hedgehog that runs really fast. That's one of the many plot points in this arc that doesn't have much thought put into it. Eggman almost becomes president and Knuckles goes into space and punches the moon. You would think that these ideas would have a lot of time devoted to them, but they only get a few minutes each, and a lot of filler is spaced in between. While the Egg Moon arc had a great concept, it was presented in a rushed and unorganized set of episodes. Also, Dr. Eggman hits the dab at one point. Make of that what you will.
Unfortunately, the season continued to drop in quality. For the next 3 episodes, the show goes right back to that terrible formula of Season 1. Things happen for a while, then Sonic swoops in to save the day. The formula is sometimes supplemented by plots involving other characters like Amy and Mr. Stewart, but these plots aren't anything special.
I sort of disagree with you on this. While I admit that I didn't find these episodes to be very great, I can commend them for at least trying to take a step away from their usual formula and mixing things up a little. Like how the side characters really help to take down the threat alongside Sonic. Speaking of the side characters,
this season of Sonic X tries to put focus on all of its main and side characters in almost every episode. And not only is it sometimes filler, but most of the characters are so boring I see no point in focusing on them. It doesn't help that the second half of this season is much slower than the first, making the pacing seem even worse.
There's also one other episode that comes before the Egg Moon arc. More creatures from Sonic's world are popping up on Earth, including the Chaotix, who just act confused and break the fourth wall. On its own, this episode would be mediocre, but there's a lot of interesting ideas presented here that don't go anywhere. The government talks about splitting up the humans and the animal creatures, and Cream reunites with their mother. These could lead to some interesting stories and development, but these ideas never actually go anywhere, making this a disappointing episode and my pick for the worst of the season. During the 3 episodes that we talked about 40 seconds ago, Chuck fixes up one of Eggman's old robots named Emeril, and Cream befriends it. Emeril can copy the abilities of others and can use them himself. It's a cool concept for a character, and it leads into an adaptation of Sonic Battle.
Wait, what's Sonic Battle? Isn't that what Sonic fans have when they disagree over something?
Nope, it was a Smash Bros.-like fighting game released for the Game Boy Advance in 2004 that introduces an ancient robot named Emeril. He's rejected by Eggman and then taken in by Sonic and his pals, who befriend him and show him how to fight. Unlike the episodes based off of the adventure games, the Sonic Battle adaptation follows the plot of its source material very loosely. I think it's a welcome change of pace, since it offers a different experience than the game, rather than a watered-down version of its story.
In this arc, Sonic and pals fight in a one-on-one tournament of battles for a Chaos Emerald, because the government is completely fine with the chance for a Chaos Emerald to fall into the wrong hands. And the battles are super hilarious and wacky. Most of the fighters in the tournament don't even fight each other. They just talk things out and then surrender to their opponent. The only entertainment you get from these battles are jokes like, "Lol, the president guy is fat, how hilarious." Emeril wins in the end, and then turns into an evil robot by a plot device, I mean the Chaos Emerald. The robot starts beating up all the characters until Cream and Cheese defeat him, because teamwork is the only thing that could beat him. Which explains why everyone suddenly couldn't work together for some reason.
This arc could have been a great opportunity to bring all of the characters together and showcase some great fights, but most of them were one-sided or didn't even have the characters come in contact with each other. The best part, in my opinion, was the end, where Cream and Cheese finally get to do something useful. It's a bittersweet moment when they take down Emeril, as we see that he actually cared for Cream, but this moment is kind of ruined by the never-ending crying that follows. But it was still an alright emotional moment, and one that makes these overall disappointing episodes a little bit better. The next 2 episodes feature yet another lackluster adventure. Eggman travels to the lost continent of Mauricia to do some evil stuff, and Sonic and his entourage come to stop the Doctor and his giant ship. They then have a boring battle in the sky with a low frame rate, and then everybody comes to the island where they explore it for a while and then leave, having accomplished nothing and wasted my time.
And yet, these 2 episodes were very close to being the best of the series. They were only one scene off from being amazing, but they just had to ruin it. They almost finally killed off Deku and Boku. These 2 are still the worst characters in the show. They're annoying, they make terrible jokes, and they add nothing to the plot. But in this episode, they sacrifice their lives for Chris, except they actually don't, and just go to live with Chris for one episode, and then they just return to Eggman. What is the point of that? And in the end, the fact that they almost killed him off makes this one of the worst episodes of the season.
I disagree, as we already all know what I think the worst of the season is. But before we wrap things up, I'd like to bring up how this season was structured. Season 1 built up all of the Chaos Emeralds coming together by having the characters collect them throughout numerous episodes. Season 2 also ends with the Emeralds coming together, but that plot is set aside in favor of many self-contained story arcs. While there were still episodes that I would consider filler, I appreciate the writers noticed how stale the Get the Emeralds plot was getting and decided to mix things up a little. Alright, that's enough of that. Let's finish this recap by talking about the final episodes of Season 2.
Surprisingly, these final 4 episodes are pretty great. They make up a story arc about Sonic and his friends being forced to leave the Earth, as them staying on the planet could cause a cataclysmic disaster. Chris is heartbroken over this news, and can't bring himself to see Sonic leave. Episodes 49 and 50 are paced pretty badly, as they move incredibly slow, and could have easily been one episode. Episode 49 only focuses on Chris whining until Eggman of all people has to shut him up. And episode 50 spends half of its runtime on a government conspiracy that comes out of nowhere and isn't brought up again. But they aren't all bad. The characters leaving feels like a big event, unlike the rushed and unsatisfying ending to season 1. Most of the characters are also pretty well characterized. Then there's episode 51, which is the best episode of the show so far. I don't know how they made an episode about Chris kidnapping Sonic good. Chris manages to display actual human emotions, and his fears of losing his friend are understandable. The show actually managed to make me feel bad for him somehow. The way they emphasize his loneliness, actually show how his parents aren't parenting him that well, and explain why Sonic acts the way he does, makes this a surprisingly smart and emotional episode. It's not without problems, mostly that the episode relies on the other 3 episodes to make sense, but it's still a great episode.
Following up the surprisingly good episode is a very odd season finale. We get to see what happens to all of the game characters once they return to their home. Some of them have interesting interactions, but most of the episode focuses on an aerial fight between Tails and Eggman that ends with Supersonic saving the day and reuniting with his pals. There's an attempt at drama, but it doesn't leave much of an impact and makes this kind of a wasted appearance of Supersonic. Things pick up quite a bit in the last few minutes, where 6 years has passed on Earth and an older Chris is trying to fix the portal to travel to Sonic's world. Because why let that guy catch a break? We also flash back to the end of episode 51. We see that Sonic is now so fast that he can gather the Chaos Emeralds together in a flash, allowing him to travel back to his world on his own. I hope that this will end the Gather the Chaos Emerald plot that is constantly used in the series, but the writers could easily forget about this plot point in the future. Overall, this episode was a very scattered attempt to tie the past few episodes together. And like the season, it had its ups and downs, but the ups were a little better than the downs.
The entirety of Season 2 is a bunch of ups and downs. It started off pretty strong, with some fine adaptations of the Sonic Dreamcast adventure games, but quickly went back to being dull and formulaic when the writers went back to doing their own thing. Sure, some of the original episodes were kind of interesting, and I can tell that the writers put some care and thought into some elements, but I can only see myself coming back to watch less than half of them. There were some small improvements, like select characters getting a sliver of development,
And other things like the credits in the Japanese version switching once again from J-pop trash to something more fitting of Sonic that I really enjoy.
but everything else, like the animation and the voice acting, was just as bad as it was before.
For example, why is the news reporter using a candy bar as a microphone? That would be like if I used my copy of Sonic 06 as a doormat. Wait, now that I think about it, that seems like the best thing you could possibly do with that game. If you don't use it like that, it serves no use.
Compared to what came before it, Season 2 offered a lot of improvements, but as a show, we still don't find it to be anything special.
So we give Sonic X Season 2 a 5.5 out of 10.
There's just one thing I don't understand. Why did the season finale have a sense of finality if it isn't the end of the series?
No, but what I do know is we all did it together!
Way to change the subject, Tails!
I guess we'll have to find out when the Season 3 review comes out later this year. Or sometime next year. Hey, if Sonic Team isn't gonna care about things getting out on time, then why should I? This season had some weird scenes that were deleted in the English version, like one with the Chaotix watching Sonic X on DVD. But the weirdest has to be when Knuckles chases Deiko and Boko into a strip club. Knuckles doesn't need to be there to get ladies. According to the lyrics of Knuckles' Sonic Adventure 1 theme,
I get it on by myself, having service
shelved.